Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another episode of First Impressions, the series where I talk about films that I've watched for the first time and give my initial thoughts and, my initial review of it. Today is a film that I didn't really go out of my way to watch. It was a choice of my college teacher for my introduction to film class. But in retrospect, now that I've thought about it for about a day or more, I have to say, probably one I would have gone out of my way to watch eventually if I had heard about it more. And it's a film that, at given time, might end up on one of my favorite films list, but I'm speaking hypothetically at the moment. It's a film I can honestly say I do enjoy, from the early 60s, 1963 to be specific. It's a comedy drama by famous Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini. And it is co-scripted by him. It, of course, is 8½. The title alone is meta. It was his 8½th film. He had co-directed a film. He made 7 others before this. And this film, in and of itself, is basically about a filmmaker trying to make a film, trying to juggle the entire process of it. And it has some meta humor in it. The opening and ending scenes alone are the meta humor of this film. They're good bookends for it and are perfect allegories and metaphors for the directing process. I'm not going to spoil what they are, but just go into those scenes knowing that and you're like, I see what he was talking about. I got the humor of him without realizing what type of film this was, and just watching it's like, oh, it's going to be a film with this type of humor, and it isn't. But then after the film, while we were on our little break, I went onto IMDb, looked up some stuff. I'm like, oh, so this is what the type of film was about. I'm like, oh, now that I think about it, this film is actually a little better than I gave it credit for. Because this was a film that, on face value, before we started the discussion or I did my research, I'm like, okay, that ending is like, what? I do some research, I'm like, ooh, I see what he's trying to say now. It's like, ooh, that makes a lot of sense. That actually makes that scene a little funnier. I probably should have done the research before I saw the film. Now, the plot of the film is that Guido is a famous Italian film director, and he's suffering from director's block. He's stalled on his new film, which apparently is a science fiction picture, which they don't really mention that, other than talking about a spaceship, which that part, watching it, confused me a little bit. It's like, what is it with this spaceship? But I guess it's a science fiction film that has some thinly veiled autobiographical material. But he's lost interest in the project, and he has artistic difficulties with the producers and other people who work with him on the film, and he's having some marital problems. He's attempting to recover from his anxieties at a spa, and he hires this one critic to review his ideas, but the critic says that they're weak, they're spineless, and they're confusing. So Guido's trying to juggle this, deal with the producers, balance spending time with his mistress while trying to relax. And later on, he invites his wife, who we find out after a little bit, it's his estranged wife, and her best friend, who also is his confidant, Rosella, over. And it just spirals from there. And part of the problem he seems to have is that while he is a great filmmaker, with this type of film, he's just not able to make it honestly, because he himself is not as honest as he should be. I mean, the first cue to that is that he's having an extramarital affair with a woman who's also married herself. So a little double thing there that I noticed. And what I liked at first is that at first you think that's his wife. At least that's the way I interpreted it at first. I thought that was his wife. I'm like, oh, he has a pretty hot wife. Then after the lovemaking section, they're talking. I'm like, ooh, that's not his wife. I actually looked around a little bit to judge the reactions of my fellow students. I didn't really notice many things on their faces, but as the film was going on, I heard some reactions, like some chuckles. I'm like, oh. So I'm like, all right, they're getting into this. And for some of the funnier bits, like this one fantasy scene that Guido has where he's surrounded by a harem of women, I think the two people who were chuckling the most out of that scene were me and this one female fellow student of mine, her nickname is Z. We were probably the ones laughing the most at that, because that scene was pure satire in how it was, because it's a fantasy one. I'm not going to spoil its context other than harem, but it's like, oh, you watch that and you're like, oh, this is great. Probably some people nowadays might label this scene as misogynist, but it's the early 60s, so you got to look at it is a product of its time, and also the fact it's his fantasy with how his real life is, you can kind of see why he'd have a fantasy like that. Because it kind of echoes some of his nostalgic memories of childhood. And I like how it segues in and out of the fantasy scenes. And from this, I can see a little bit of how my teacher mentioned that Christopher Nolan was inspired by this film when he made Inception, which I haven't seen yet, so I can't really see the full inspiration, but from what little I know about the film, I can see it. It segues, he's like sitting there, he sees something that makes him either think of a memory or makes him go into his fantasy world to cope with it, which he does use it as a coping mechanism, and considering he's a director, his fantasies are very vivid. Artistic people usually do have the vivid imaginations, vivid fantasies when they're thinking, and as one themselves, I could probably say we're sometimes prone to daydreaming, but that's where we do our most of our thinking, and we're probably also a little bit prone to overthinking and overanalyzing certain things. Sometimes as a multitask, while we're thinking of something, another part of our mind is dwelling on a project, or when we have nothing else to do, we're mulling over stuff. Sometimes at work, I find myself doing that when there's nothing to do, no one's coming in. I'm just sitting there, standing there, and mulling over a project I want to work on, or one that I'm stuck on. Like, for instance, at the time of this recording, one I am stuck on is my Fantasia written review. It's one that I need to get back to finishing in the writing stage, but it's like, how do I put this into words? Conquer the blank page! And that was one thing that really got into me. Another thing that I noticed was how the film integrates Roman Catholicism into it, considering it's set in Italy and all the characters are Italian except for a couple. It's like, yeah, in the 60s it would make sense they bring the Catholic Church into this. Having been grown up Catholic, I'm not a practicing one anymore as a side note, but I get the imagery there, and it is present there, and especially with how it dominates Guido's life. He has to get permission from the cardinal, talk with the cardinal, and the cardinal tells him basically that he doesn't use this language, but he basically tells him his happiness is irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, which is like, damn, cardinal! That's some harsh words from you, your holiness. And when you contrast that with one of his flashbacks involving dancing with a prostitute on the beach and how he's punished for it afterwards, dunce camp and all, it's like, yeah, they really overbear him. And this is something I didn't notice, but apparently Guido's wife is supposed to be a kind of compared to the Virgin Mary, which I can sort of see that. It's not a comparison I'd probably make myself, but I can see that. I think part of that is the fact that we never really get a sense of sexual intimacy between the two of them. But I'd say in the context of the film, that's because they were estranged, they just got back together, and then we see their marital issues. It's like, I don't really think that's going to be something on their minds when they're going through this. They're going to be thinking of other stuff. Especially when Luisa, that's his wife's name, sees the screen tests that he shot months ago and sees the character that is obviously based on her, or at least his interpretation of her. And that alone is like, oh yeah, your marriage is doomed to start. Like I said, the last scene in the movie is a little weird to follow, but if you go into it knowing that the opening and ending scenes are basically allegories and metaphors for what a director goes through when they're making a movie, then you get it. And compare and contrast it with the opening scene makes a lot more sense. So I'm just helping people, and that's why the last couple scenes leading up to it also don't take them 100% seriously. That what we see may not actually be what actually is going on. It might just be a stand-in for something. Because when I first saw the scene with the press conference, I'm like, all right, pretty cut and dry. Then the following scenes, it's like, wait a minute, didn't he just? Oh. So it's part of its little meta humor and meta charm, I guess you would say. It's basic. If I was going to sum it up with a sentence, it's basically a film about filmmaking that isn't a documentary. It's about the struggles and drama that a filmmaker, more specifically a director, goes through while making a film, both from the people who are helping them make the film and their own personal life. Their personal life can get in the way, it could damage the film, or in this case, not make the film happen at all, because that's what happens in this film. Like I said, definitely a great film. Probably not for everybody. If you're not really the biggest fan of meta humor, you probably won't like it. If you're not the biggest fan of black and white films, you won't like it. You definitely probably won't like it if you do not like having to read subtitles. If you don't have a problem with that, I'd recommend it. But whether you like it or not, it's going to be up to you. It did win 2 Academy Awards when it came out. Best Foreign Language Film and Best Costume Design, which I could say, foreign language film, yeah, I could see it winning that one. Heck, I could have seen this thing being nominated for Best Picture in general. I'm just going to see what it beat. It beat Twin Sisters of Kyoto, obviously a Japanese one, The Red Lanterns from Greece, Los Tarantos from Spain, and Knife in the Water from Poland. I think I've heard of that last one, but I'm not quite sure. But definitely one I could see winning that one, like I said. And Best Costume Design, just from the Mistress's costumes and Guido's costumes alone, yep. I'm going to check see if it got any other nominations. It also got nominated for Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Art Direction. Definitely deserving of those ones. I'd say it also should have gotten a nomination for Best Cinematography and probably Best Set Designs if they had it back then, but that's just me. Like I said, definitely a great film. Does come with my recommendation with those little asterisks and little side notes. But even if you were to try to put those aside, you might have a good time, you might not. At the very least, you probably might enjoy the ridiculousness of the opening scene.